It has been way too long. We are back with the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I am your host, Noah Rubin. This show is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, part of the Believe Network, and presented to you by our partners at FanDuel. Like I said, been a few weeks, been busy, had a child, so haven't really been able to follow the NBA as closely as I typically do there for a little bit. I'm back following things. This is not me saying don't listen to this because I haven't been paying attention. I have been, just had to catch back up. Slowly reintroducing work stuff and now finally able to end the hiatus for the podcast, which was only a couple weeks. But very excited to be back doing this. Always fun to just be able to talk about fantasy basketball, about dynasty leagues, and nobody better to talk about it with, and honestly, nobody better to learn from than Matt Lawson, who we're going to have back on today. He dropped dynasty rankings a few weeks ago, so we're going to take a look at those, talk about some players that have done. Honestly, I was supposed to be risers and fallers, but I ended up just picking out risers. Players that I think for the most part have risen up in his ranks. If they didn't, just players that I view as general risers this season. And where do we go from here? What does this maybe like a hot start mean for them? How do we value them in dynasty leagues moving forward? Really excited to get into this episode. So got at least 10 players to talk about. Probably going to end up talking about way more. So strap in and get ready for a lot of dynasty information coming your way. All right, and Matt Lawson is here. He is back on the show. We are going to be discussing his latest dynasty rankings, which are a couple weeks out at this point, but still very relevant, and we can discuss where things might have changed over the last few weeks because, man, there's been some really fun, really interesting performances, really nice stretches from a number of players. But, Matt, before we get into all the nitty-gritty, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. We talked about this all off season that once you really get into now over a month of the NBA season, there's going to be things that none of us predicted, maybe some things that we did, some things that go completely in the opposite direction of what we thought they were going to, breakouts that couldn't have been anticipated, breakouts that could have been. And it's an awesome time to be a basketball fan, but especially in dynasty basketball leagues, because everybody kind of gets on the same script for the most part through the off season. By the end of it, especially, like everyone kind of herds into a lot of the same opinions. Maybe people are a little bit on the edges of each side of it, but for the most part, there's a pack mentality, a herd mentality that gets people in the same place. Now everyone's having to figure it out for themselves again, and values are shifting. Some stuff's real, some stuff's not, and you get to be able to try to figure out what's signal, what's noise. And I love this part of it because it can be a huge mistake to move up a guy way up in your estimation, your valuation, your dynasty rankings. And that can end up looking like small sample size theater that you end up regretting later by making a trade, making an ad, making a drop that ends up changing the trajectory of your team. But if you are doing it for the right reasons and you make a big shift and you make a bet on somebody, it can make some of the biggest difference in this time of year where people really aren't sure what to believe in.
Yeah, and we've got a handful of those players to talk about, and one of them that fits what you were saying about players that you are very high on, you were right about, that we're not going to discuss because I feel like we've already talked about Austin Reaves a ton. But in your latest dynasty rankings, he's up to 23, which is the highest that I've seen for him. Didn't want to spend too much time on him just because we already have talked about him a good bit through multiple episodes. But I think it's been impressive that he's been able to still be really effective even with LeBron back. And it's definitely him and Luka Doncic as the future of this Lakers team.
Yeah, I think we talked about previously that Austin Reaves' perception amongst both fantasy fans, fantasy managers, and basketball fans in general tends to lag behind the reality of who he is. Because, in his rookie season, he was kind of a mean player. He was the guy that, had the deer in the headlights look as LeBron James was telling him what to do out on the court. And he's built things onto his game every single season. And now we're seeing a guy that's a legitimate all-star candidate. And that's actually who he is. And we warned everybody in the offseason when we talked about Reaves, hey, he was really good on this team after Luka came in. He fit in with Luka just fine. There was not the huge drop-off that a lot of analysts anticipated when Luka came in, that, oh, okay, well, this is kind of the end of it for Austin Reaves. You're going to have to wait for him to get traded. Hopefully he'll get to a new team because he's not going to be as good anymore. He's been better, and that's because the playmaking evolved. The off-ball shooting evolved. And now this is a player who I think is a legitimate sidekick to Luka Doncic, who can have a ton of value the same way that Kyrie Irving did with Luka in Dallas. I think he's a similar offensive talent, at least in his ability to be able to play on ball and off ball. And that fits extremely well with Luka, just the way that Kyrie fit in really well with both Luka and LeBron over his career. I think Austin Reaves can do that. I think he likely stays in Los Angeles. He continues to produce. That's why he's a top 25 dynasty asset to me. And I think some people still don't believe in that. Maybe now that LeBron's back, maybe now that Luka's going to be putting up big stat lines again, people are going to move away from it. But regardless of whether Austin Reaves is in LA or he's somewhere else, I think he's a top 25 dynasty asset and someone you should be investing in.
Yeah, and we'll obviously be keeping an eye on him as the season progresses because it's just been so fun so far. But we got a handful of players to talk about today. Wanted to start with Tyrese Maxey as the first player who you had ranked 10th in your latest update. One, I'm curious to see if that's changed at all since then. And this part of the reason I'm asking is because on Twitter yesterday, saw at DBC Jason, really popular Dynasty account, was replying to at Dynatize, newer Dynasty account that you should follow, about where to rank Tyrese Maxey, and he said top 5. And I think that's a little bit higher, which he said his rankings will be dropping soon. But it's been really impressive what we've seen from Tyrese Maxey so far this year. He's getting to the rim at a higher rate. He's finishing well. Career highs in points, assists, threes, and free throw attempts. Like, it's just, this is his team now. It doesn't matter that Joel Embiid is healthy or not. It doesn't matter if Paul George is healthy or not. They've added, VJ Edgecombe's there, Jared McCain's there, Quentin Grimes is still there. Like, it doesn't matter. This is Tyrese Maxey's team, and he is a fantasy superstar at this point. Are you still sticking with him kind of 10th, or do you think he's honestly bumped up since then?
I've moved him up a little bit, but really he's now in a tier with I would still have Cade Cunningham as top 5 above this tier. I think Cade now has separated himself. He's not quite at the Luka, Jokic, SGA, Victor tier, but I have Cade a little bit higher just because of what we've seen from Cade at the beginning of the season. I feel more comfortable with him at number 5 than I do anybody else. After that, Maxey's in that conversation. I think he's in the conversation for number 6, number 7, number 8. You could have him right around there. I think that still includes Cooper Flagg, and I think we're beginning to see why in recent games from Cooper Flagg, why he belongs in that tier. I still think it includes Anthony Edwards, and it includes another guy beyond Maxey that we're going to talk about in a second. But you can easily have those guys in that next tier of dynasty assets below the truly elite top 5 for me, because Maxey's been phenomenal, and we've seen the steals regress a little bit. The minutes are obviously massive, and that's a big part of his production this year, but he's become one of the best scorers and shooters in the entire NBA. The consistency of that is undeniable, and obviously when you're playing around 40 minutes a night, it's going to be easy to be able to put up box score stats, but we have to appreciate and acknowledge that this is a huge leap for him to be this productive without MVP level Joel Embiid in the lineup with him, because for a lot of his career, when Maxey was with Embiid, he looked great. And when Embiid was out of the lineup, he didn't look big enough for the moment to be able to fully take on the team. We're past that now. This is an all NBA level player. This is one of the best guards in the NBA. Tyrese Maxey is obviously a top 10 dynasty asset. And I think you make the argument that he's even a top 6 dynasty asset. He's definitely in that range in categories or points formats. This is all for real. Even with the inflated minutes, even if that comes back a little bit, you are going to be getting top 10 fantasy production from Tyrese Maxey across his prime.
Yeah, I mean, I think it provides a sense of hope to Philly, considering how things should be looking for this team. Like, just the Paul George signing and just how many injuries he's had, Joel Embiid's held. It's like there's still this hope with Tyrese Maxey here. Like, you have other things to be excited about as well, but it's really cool to see Maxey kind of just move into that superstar spotlight as Embiid just continues to sadly deal with so many injuries. But the next player that we can talk about is the one I'm assuming the one that you were talking about as in the same tier, and that's Jalen Johnson, who's also just kind of been a superstar this year. It definitely, I guess not similarly to Maxey, but Trae Young's absence has allowed Jalen Johnson to kind of take over and be the guy to start this season, and he has put up some monster stats just in the few days before we're recording this. 29, 13 and 7, 41, 14 and 7, 29, 12 and 12, some other big performances throughout the year. He gets defensive stats. He's shooting threes a lot better than he had previously. He's a beast on the glass. He gets assists. He's just kind of doing everything. How high is Jalen Johnson's ceiling? Because you had him 12th at the latest update. I'm assuming he is higher if he's in that next tier of guys. But how good can Jalen Johnson be? And how will the return of Trae Young kind of impact what he does?
Well, let's give first credit to the two of us, because I think we were way ahead on Jalen Johnson in Dynasty rankings before the season. I think both of us had him in the top 12 before this year started. And obviously he's validated all the things that we thought. And, at this point, we pray for health and availability for Jalen Johnson, because everything else is there. And that's what we knew. That's why we liked him so much. We just looked at it and said, look, this guy's been snake bitten by injuries. It's suppressed people's perception of him, but he is a fantasy superstar. And he is every bit of that now, on top of being a better real life basketball player than he was last year. The fantasy stats were already massive. They're even bigger now. And I think the on-court production and his ability to be the guy on this Atlanta Hawks team while Trae Young has been out, still carry the team, has shown that there is a future in Atlanta that doesn't involve Trae Young, that prominently involves Jalen Johnson. Now, I don't know when that's going to happen. I think it will eventually happen. And this is proof of concept that it can and probably should happen. Even with Trae Young back, Jalen Johnson is going to be massively productive. I think he's going to still have a very large role on this team. The success that they have had without Trae Young does not say that they need to revert back to reducing Jalen Johnson's role. Yes, it's going to take a little bit of a scale back when a player like Trae Young gets back into the lineup. But the reason that we like Jalen Johnson so much is that he is so productive beyond just getting points. The volume of his shots is not the sole way that he's going to get you fantasy production. And that's why we liked him before, and we liked him even when we didn't know for sure whether Trae Young was going to be in the long-term plans of the Atlanta Hawks. So for me, he's, I think, a top 8 dynasty asset. I think you could argue for him all the way, just like you could with Tyrese Maxey, all the way up to 6. He's in that tier for me. And if Trae Young is traded, and depending on what they get back, there is that opportunity for him to be a guy who has top 5 fantasy seasons in the future, especially if the shooting progression continues. The big thing that I want to point out here, he's 24 years old. So this is really the beginning of the prime. And with so many of these young players, I think we're so spoiled right now with so many of these great young players who are producing at such a high level at such young ages that we forget that the arc of NBA history tells us that these guys are not going to have their best fantasy producing seasons until 27, 28, 29 years old. That's when the overwhelming majority of really good fantasy players have their best fantasy season. So we're years away from that with these guys. That's why they're so valuable in Dynasty, because they're just entering their prime and we're already getting production that's first round level production from them. If you're getting that already, and there's progression that you're going to see, and you can see it with the elite guys, SGA adding new layers to his game, Nikola Jokic still adding new layers to his game and getting better at almost 31 years old. This is not the NBA of old, even to be able to say that your prime is over once you enter your 30s. It is still ongoing with the elite players, and we're seeing these guys extend into their early, mid, and for LeBron James, early 40s to be able to play in the NBA and still be productive in fantasy. So it really changes the way that you need to view it. And it means you need to covet young stars at a really high level, because if you allow yourself to trade them away, they're going to be productive not just for a short window of their prime. It's not fantasy football where you're looking at guys who are only going to give you that year, and then the running back, when he turns 27, it's time to say goodbye. You can't trade these guys away, even if there's a dip, even if there's an injury, because when you get this level of elite production at an early age is an indicator that you could have it for 12, 13, 14 years into the future.
Yeah, Jalen Johnson is, he's a guy we were very high on. Excited to see what he can continue to do when Trae Young returns. I wasn't expecting the leap that he has had, and maybe part of that is the fact that Trae Young is not there. I was expecting him to do kind of more of what he did, maybe a little bit better. He's taken more of a leap than I guess I thought he would, which is really exciting. Excited to see what he continues to do. When Trae gets back, I'm not thinking that Jalen Johnson's value is going to kind of nosedive. Just interested to see what the Hawks do, because this does feel like the first time in my mind, as a fan of the team, that hey, they actually could trade Trae Young. It actually might be a move that makes sense, because you have Jalen Johnson, you have these other players, you have potentially a top 3 pick with the Pelicans currently having the worst record in the league. It seems like it's a real possibility, which is just something to keep an eye on. But right now, at the early part of the year, this has absolutely been Jalen Johnson's team, and he has risen to the occasion. Another forward from that 2021 class that has been having one of the best seasons, arguably I would say his best season so far this year, is Scottie Barnes, which is why the Raptors have been surprisingly good to start the year. I think there was a lot of questions about how this team would fit together, but Scottie Barnes being as good as he is has definitely helped some things. He's actually, I was looking at Data Baller earlier before we started, he spent less time with the ball in his hands, spending more time off the ball, but he's been more impactful on offense. He's been able to shoot the ball better. You had Scottie Barnes at 19 with your latest update. Are we thinking Scottie Barnes has improved his value with his play so far this year, and how good can this guy be?
Yeah, we're getting second round production from him now. And again, this is another guy who's only 24 years old. And he looks like a more complete basketball player this season. And I think last season, a lot of what was going on in Toronto was forcing Scottie was exploring the studio space on offense. There was mid-range shots that he hadn't really been trying to take before. There was an effort to be able to expand his game. And sometimes you have a rough season before you kind of have the breakthrough when you do that as a young player. Because he tested the bounds of what he could do, I think he's found a little bit better of who he is on the court, offensively and defensively. We already saw the big leap in his help defense earlier in his career. That continues to blossom. The shot blocking this year has been awesome. He continues to be a good producer of steals as well. And like Jalen Johnson, this is another guy who it's not all about being the primary offensive option. That helps, and sometimes he can play that role, but he doesn't need to be super productive in fantasy, because I think you can get strong percentages from him. It's been really nice to be able to see the free throw shooting taking a leap forward this year as well. If that holds, that boosts him up even more in my estimation. He's finishing at the rim better than he ever has at any point in his career. And to be able to nearly double his block rate is putting him in a position to be a real fantasy superstar for us if this stuff maintains. And we've seen it kind of ebb and flow at different points in his career. But we're seeing the free throw shooting, which is a nice indicator that maybe the three-point shooting, while still lower volume, he's taking better shots from three. He's taking the shots that make sense for him from three, which he really wasn't doing last year. We saw the three-point percentage drop down to 27%. This year, we're over 40%. I don't know if he's an over 40% three-point shooter, but certainly the shot diet is a reason to be able to think that he is now a more efficient player. And we're seeing that true shooting percentage creep up above 60%. That's a sweet spot for Scottie Barnes. If he's at that level, this is a guy who can make, a lot of all-star teams in the future because of his two-way impact. I love the season that we're getting from him so far. And here's an area where I feel like I was just wrong. What Toronto has built this season, this team makes sense. It works. The bench unit is awesome. I've been a big Jamal Shed guy since he was a pre-draft prospect. He's someone that I had way above his draft slot in rookie rankings because of what we saw from him from Houston. And he's been awesome. We talked about watching the Sandro Mamukelashvili minutes in Toronto the last time I was on. The Mamu minutes have been great. He's been an awesome fit. Our guy, Colin Murray Boyles, everything is coming up Toronto Raptors right now. And, I don't think it's going to get a little bit bumpier as we go on, but this looks like a team that's competitive, that the construction of it actually makes a little bit of sense. Scottie Barnes is a central part of that, and a guy that I think is back to being the top 15 dynasty asset that we thought that he was earlier in his career after them and some winding road to it in the past couple seasons.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that this thing works in Toronto, because our questions, I think, were pretty valid. It's like, who the heck is going to shoot the ball? They are still towards the bottom of the league in three-pointers made. Scottie Barnes' improvement has definitely opened things up. They are first in the league in fast break points, playing with that pace, getting out in transition. Things work pretty well. All right, next player that we are going to talk about here is Deni Avdija, who our partners at FanDuel currently have as second in the Most Improved Player award race. We talked about Jalen Johnson earlier. He's fifth. We've talked about Austin Reaves. He's sixth. Jalen Duren is currently first, who's actually a player we're not going to talk about today, but who's also been really good for Detroit to start this season. But as far as Avdija goes, he's been stuffing the stat sheet. There's a couple somewhat, I don't even know if you call them weaknesses, but less strong categories. Like the turnovers, they're bad, but like every high usage player has that. The shooting percentages aren't great, but as far as points, rebounds, and assists, he has been a stud, averaging career highs in all of those, career highs in threes. Avdija has been a player, or is a player that you've been high on, if I'm not mistaken. You had him at 34 in your last Dynasty ranking update. And is it possible that we are seeing him even higher next time you publish some rankings?
Yeah, Deni's one of those guys that I've kept myself above consensus on for a few years now, and he continues to be able to push that forward. Not necessarily prove me right, but I mean, I've proved that I wasn't high enough. And this offseason, when I think the offseason started, right at the end of the regular season, right around then, we had a show where I talked about how in my Dynasty rankings, Deni was a top 50 Dynasty asset. And that was way above consensus at the time. And I think there was some idea, oh, well, this guy was just kind of a Mickey Mouse March guy. He wasn't really, making a leap. It was just the fact that Portland had nothing else, and he got to kind of show out in that portion of the year where Jeremy Grant was already on vacation. And, it wasn't really going to be a real thing. But we had already seen this flash from Deni in Washington before he got traded to be able to say, hey, there's more here than we originally thought. There's a guy here. And there it was a little bit more two-way impact. Defensively looked really good. I think it's funny when a guy blossoms offensively the way that Avdija has, Jalen Johnson a little bit too, but especially with Deni, all of a sudden the defense becomes a little less important to them. And we've definitely seen that with Deni this year. Like the defense is not as important to him. The steal rate has dropped a lot. He's not doing as much off ball as he was before. On ball, he doesn't have as much responsibility. Part of that is personnel in Portland, but he's taking on a massive load here, especially in times where Drew Holiday's been out. Huge leap forward in the assist rate. For me, at this point, continuing to be ahead of consensus, I have him just inside of my top 25 in the rankings update that I'm going to be putting out in the coming week or so. And for me, it's because of how sustainable what Deni Avdija is doing offensively. It's not built on really outsized shooting. He proved last year he was at 36.5% from three. This year he's at 38. The volume is up a little bit, but really what he does is he gets downhill. He's a really physical driver. He will put his shoulder to you and he will battering ram his way to the rim. And he's going to move you off of your spot as a defender. You're not going to be able to stop him when he comes in with that form, when he comes in with that shoulder. And he's able to get to the rim and score efficiently there. And they're getting out in transition at an extreme rate, which fits exactly what he is. This is why we were so high on these guys, whether we're talking about Deni and Jalen Johnson, because big physical drivers in this NBA, we were already seeing in previous seasons, and now we're seeing it especially as teams are like, let's just get out in transition before defenses can set up. We're not going to get, it's going to be fast offense. It's going to be transition offense. We are just going to get out with guys who are really big, who can dribble and get to the rim. And we're going to attack whatever matchup we're getting before you can actually get into what you want to get into defensively. Miami's doing it at a great rate. That's why you're seeing a physical driver like Jaime Jaquez have an amazing season. This is what made Jaren Jackson Jr. so great last year in the offense that the Miami Heat are now running, because he discovered himself as a physical driver and was just able to go and do that every game. The amount that he's doing it now is a lot lower, and you're seeing the regression from him as a result. But guys like Deni are the perfect example of what the modern NBA is doing. Guys who can dribble, pass, and shoot, who have a ton of size and are able to use what the NBA's rules allow you to do as a physical driver. It's almost impossible to be able to defend. Once a guy can finish through contact, once a guy can finish aggressively and drive aggressively at that size, it's very difficult to stop, and it's something to build an offense around. That's why you're seeing it popularized across the entire NBA right now. So I think this is fully sustainable. Hey, it's another guy who's 24 years old and entering into the prime of his career. Deni Avdija is for real. I don't really care what else they're doing in Portland. He's going to be a core part of it going forward. And that's why, for me, he's a top 25 Dynasty asset. A guy that a year ago, you were able at this time, rock bottom prices. I mean, he was in the doghouse with Chauncey Billups. He was not in the starting lineup. It looked like he didn't really have a path. He didn't even look good defensively. Offensively, he was a mess. He wasn't hitting shots. And if you got him at that time, based on how high he was in Dynasty rankings, if it was my advocacy or someone else's, you got an absolute gem. This is a guy to be able to build around, and a guy that the Portland Trailblazers are going to be building around going forward.
Yeah, as you said, kind of what else is going on in Portland. Everything else seems kind of iffy at this point. Some things have worked, some things haven't, but Deni Avdija is definitely feeling like the face of the franchise there. Heading down to Washington, Deni Avdija's former team, Alex Sarr has taken a pretty nice step forward this year, averaging, I guess career highs. It's the second year. It's just everything's kind of better than it was during his rookie year. But the main leap that was something I thought was going to take a couple of seasons has been the field goal percentage. Shot 39.4% from the floor as a rookie and is at 51.5% this year. Spending more time not shooting threes or shooting fewer threes, which obviously helps the field goal percentage, which isn't supposed to just not shooting threes raises your field goal percentage by 12%. He's been better. He's improved in areas that I thought were going to take a couple seasons. The rebounds are up. The blocks are still there. Alex Sarr is starting to become that high-level prospect that I think had a lot of people excited about him when Washington drafted him, when a lot of people had him number 1 in that class, and then obviously he went to. How are you feeling about Alex Sarr now? You had him 44th in your latest update, which was a pretty big rise from your previous rankings where you had him preseason.
Yeah, we've been taking some victory laps here. This is about accountability. I'm going to hold up my hand here. I was wrong on Alex Sarr because I watched him last season and I saw a guy who just looked completely overwhelmed by the physicality of the NBA. And he looked like that in the NBL as well in the previous year. And I know players gain strength, but sometimes they don't gain mentality. And to me, this looked like a guy. I've seen skinny guys play tough as rookies. I watched Chet Holmgren do that. He wasn't necessarily stronger than Alex Sarr as a rookie, but there's a level of toughness and physicality that is a mentality that you have to bring to playing on the interior in the NBA. That is a threshold requirement for playing on the interior in the NBA. And last season, Alex Sarr didn't have it. This year, he does. And that is a massive change. And you're seeing it in every facet of his game, every facet of his fantasy game. Let's start with the finishing. Last season, he's only taking 4.5 attempts per 75 possessions at the rim. That's really low for an NBA center. This year, it's up to 7.6, which is 94th percentile. That's a massive change. Oh, and when he's there, we've gone from 60% finishing at the rim to 71%. So now we're at 82nd percentile finishing for a guy who is not still done developing physically. The dunks have gone way up this season. He has been able to finish through contact at a much higher rate than last season. I love everything about it. Last year, we kind of had an even split between him at all 3 levels. That's not the way that his game should work, and he's modified that significantly. We still have a lot of mid-range attempts, and he's not terribly efficient at that. That's the low-hanging fruit that's going to get fixed. Either he's going to get better at those mid-range attempts, or he's going to cut them out of his diet entirely. We will see. This is a guy who I characterized as a guard trapped in the center's body in some kind of Freaky Friday situation. He is not that. And I think that at least that spell has been reversed, and he's back to being a guy who I think can play on the interior in the NBA. I like that the 3-point shot is not his bread and butter anymore, as you mentioned, and we're still getting the blocks at the level that we were getting before, even higher block percentage this season, on top of the fact that the rebounding, pointing to that physicality, that change in physical presence, that has made a huge leap as well this season. This is all the bedrock of a really good fantasy player. And yes, there are still holes. So I haven't moved him up from where I had him in my prior update yet, because I don't think that there's growth for him to become a superstar NBA scorer where the points are in the high 20s or the 30s. I don't think he's that guy. Maybe he'll prove me wrong. Maybe there's more to him. Maybe there's a whole nother evolution beyond this. But I'm now comfortable with him to be able to say this is a long-term starter, a guy who could potentially make all-star games, especially in the Eastern Conference in his prime, and a player that I would be willing to bet on in the long term to be a really helpful fantasy player because of his ability to be able to hit threes, block shots. It's kind of like the Jaren Jackson Jr., Miles Turner fantasy game where maybe you wish that the rebounding were at an even higher level. I think he's on his way to being a better rebounder than probably either of them. You already may be. But you're getting that ability to be able to score on all 3 levels on top of getting traditional big man stats on top of it. I think he's a really helpful player. There are nice passing flashes with him. That's not fully developed yet, but it's solid. And it makes an all-around really nice 9-category stat set, a nice friendly points format stat set, a guy that I really like going forward, and I was wrong on.
Yeah, and it has been really fun, and kind of like Deni Avdija, or maybe not exactly, but Sarr is doing well. The rest of everything going on in Washington, some have been good, some has been pretty I think Keyonte George is another bright spot, but a lot of the other guys haven't been great, but at least they have Sarr to hang their hat on entering the 2026 draft, where maybe they're able to get kind of that franchise player. And then Sarr is able to be the center that they pair with that franchise player. And Washington has a dangerous team for a while there. Another player from the 2024 draft class that we can talk about is Stephon Castle. Was really good as a rookie. Then they draft Dylan Harper. They traded for De'Aaron Fox last year, and now it's kind of like, okay, Castle is this talented player with a few holes in his game for fantasy. He's not a great shooter. But now he's also competing with Fox, who's the point guard of the now, and Harper, who's the point guard of the future. I thought it was pretty interesting when De'Aaron Fox came back and Castle immediately had 4 games with double-digit assists. Seeing him have the ball in his hands, I thought that was really interesting for the Spurs to do. You had him up to 65, I believe, in your latest update. It's a pretty big rise for Stephon Castle. Is that something that you were still thinking that he can either continue to rise or hover around here? I think I believe in the talent, but the situation here doesn't feel optimal. What's kind of your read on this for Castle?
I have no doubt that Stephon Castle can be a part of the long-term core for the San Antonio Spurs. But the reality is that he's at the very least not going to be the lead ball handler for this team between Dylan Harper, who I think is going to be a multi-time all-star, maybe an all-NBA level player based on what we've seen in his early career. He's been phenomenal. And Victor Wembanyama is there, by the way. He's going to come back. He's going to be healthy, and he's going to be incredible. So you're already behind the 8 ball there in your role offensively on this team. But you've also still got De'Aaron Fox there. And while, yes, Castle's few games before he got hurt, when Fox came back, he still was super productive. The assist rate has been massive this season. The evolution in his passing and playmaking are a big reason why I moved him up so significantly, along with the jump in his steal rate. This is the question going forward. When he comes back, when we have Wemby, when we've got Harper, when we've got Fox, what does it look like? How is Castle fitting in? Because I get it for defensive purposes. Like, he's going to fit in on this team. He's not a good enough shooter to be able to fit in on this team long-term unless he gets better at it, at least not in the way that we want him to. He's actually, been pretty efficient shooting corner threes. The volume is super low, but he takes a bunch of arc threes that are not going in at all. And they didn't at UConn. They didn't as a rookie. He's really good at getting downhill. He can finish at the rim. I like a lot of things about Stephon Castle, but this is one of the most interesting questions in Dynasty basketball, in long-term team building in the NBA. How are the Spurs going to make this work? What moves are they going to make to be able to make it work? I can totally see a future where Harper's the starting point guard, Castle's the starting 2, and they have Victor Wembanyama obviously as the core of the team, and everything else is built around that. That makes perfect sense to me. That can work. But we're going to need to be able to see this assist rate and steal rate that have made such a massive improvement for Castle early this season hold if he's going to be the level of fantasy player that I now think that he can be. A guy who could be a top 60, top 50 dynasty asset for you and give you seasons producing at a top 50 level, because we didn't see that kind of fantasy game last season. And we're seeing a big leap of it this year, but in admittedly a smaller sample than we would probably like. This is something we're going to be watching really, really closely when we get to the other side of this injury for Castle, and he's back with hopefully a full Spurs lineup by Christmas.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how everything fits together. It's a good problem for the Spurs to have, even if it isn't an ideal scenario for Castle, or really even for Dylan Harper to try and have to compete for it in the short term. But next up, and I think we're actually sticking with the 2024 class again, and we're going to talk about Zach Edey, who I think polarizing is a fair word, because there are some people that are very, very high on Zach Edey. And then I've been pretty pessimistic about him, and I had him as for redraft leagues, a preseason sleeper, like a nice late round pick. And he's been really, really good. I still have my questions long term, but he's been a beast, especially the last few games. Just looking at it, 12 points, 15 rebounds, 4 blocks against Dallas, exited early against Denver, then 21 and 15, 2 blocks against the Pelicans, 5-19 with 3 blocks against the Clippers, 32-17 and 5 blocks against the Kings, 19 and 15 with a block against the Spurs. Like, just dominating down low, which, I mean, 7'4", 300 pounds. That kind of fits the bill there. My question here, I think, is a little bit, is this I don't know if it would be a sell high moment for Edey, if that's like a fair way to put it, but if we're looking at some of the matchups here, dominated the Pelicans, who had Derek Queen down low, or, I think it was Kevon Looney, Eve Messi in there. The Clippers had 19 boards against Zubats, but wasn't really scoring that much. Then against Drew Eubanks and Maxime Reynaud has 32 and 17. And then against Luke Cornett has 19 and 15. A few matchups that he should dominate, he is dominating. I'm curious to see a few more matchups against more elite centers or better teams, I think is actually a fair way to put it, with the Spurs without Wemby in there. But what's your take on Zach Edey? Because you have him in the, I can see 68, which from your previous update, so this would be the last update from before that, no change there for you. Has he risen up at all? And is there any concern? Or are you just convinced that he can be a stud now?
Well, see, so I had Edey at 68 before he had played a game this season because, on this show, on Dan Besbris's show, I've been banging the drum beat all off season on Edey as a guy who we saw at the end of the season, this level of domination. Maybe not quite this level, but we saw the beginnings of this level of domination at the end of last season. Once we got Thomas Isalo inserted as the interim coach, that completely changed things for Zach Edey at the end of last season. He was dominant down the stretch, playing big minutes, and then he played huge minutes in the Grizzlies series against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And this was the most important thing. The stats were good. The results were not great ultimately for the Grizzlies. They were competitive in some of those games. But the reality was the Thunder couldn't play him off of the court. And that was the thing, that if in the pre-draft process, I would have told you that entering his second season, Zach Edey would have a 100th percentile defensive EPM, that he would be, by the advanced metrics, considered to be the best or one of the best defensive players in the NBA. And yeah, small sample size, but that wasn't even remotely on the table. People were talking, the people were talking about Edey as, okay, yeah, super productive in college, he's massive, but it's never going to work in the NBA. He's going to be the new Boban. You're just going to play 5 out. You're going to play him off of the court. Well, we live in a new reality in the NBA that maybe we didn't anticipate, where being a massive human being who can offensive rebound and play as physically as Zach Edey does, he's basically a bigger Steven Adams. If you took Steven Adams and gave him, like a Super Mario mushroom to be able to level up in size, that's what you would get in Zach Edey. Sets bone-crushing screens, and he will wipe out anybody boxing them out. And that's what he's doing right now. The block rate has taken a massive leap as well. This is a guy who can be the anchor of an NBA defense. And his minutes right now, he's doing this. He's producing at this level, only around 25 minutes per game as they ramp him up. I think that's going to get to 30 minutes per game. And then you're talking about a guy who could be one of the best fantasy centers in the NBA. So for me, I already have him moved up a little bit in my rankings because there's still limitations in the fantasy stats set. You're not going to get assists. You're not going to get steals. I don't believe in the three-point shooting being more than kind of just like a really slow, trailer 3 gimmick that he's occasionally going to bust out. But you've got a guy who's going to give you the elite big man stats, field goal percentage, rebounds and blocks, all at super elite levels. You're going to be able to get points and free throw percentage at levels that aren't hurting you, that are at least neutral. And that's massive for a big man, especially with the free throw percentage. I mean, he has enough touch, and we saw it at Purdue, that it's entirely possible that at some point he becomes a positive free throw shooter and be able to help you with his percentage and his volume. If that happens, then it's really game over. So I'm not selling high off of this at all. This is what this is an extension of what we saw at the end of last year, an extension of what I thought Zach Edey could be. And the fact that he is a good defensive player, the fact he's able to be a big positive impact defensive player with his offensive skill, what we saw from his career at Purdue, what we're seeing now, this is a guy that you want to invest in, hold on to. You're not selling off of this big moment. You're looking forward to these big moments to continue into the future.
Yeah, and I think maybe another encouraging point is that I think for the preseason, a lot of the reason that, you pointed out and reasons that I was optimistic were he's going to have John Morant. They were going to run a lot of pick and rolls, and he was going to be able to get a lot of easy looks. And they've done this without John Morant. They've done it without Ty Jerome. They've done it without Scottie Pippen Jr. Like, it's Vince Williams and it's Cam Spencer as the point guards for Zach Edey. So if they are able to get John Morant back and healthy, and that's able to stick, or somebody else that would be considered more of a long-term option there, just to make things a little bit easier for Zach Edey, that'll be interesting to see those results. All right. Next up, let's talk about Keegan Murray, who we've only gotten to see a small sample size from this year because he missed the start of the season. But he's been really, really good so far. 18.3 points, 7 boards, 1.8 assists, 2.2 steals, 1.3 blocks. All those would be career highs over the course of a season. The 1.7 threes are actually down. He's kind of shot fewer and fewer threes, and he's actually shooting a lower percentage from three this year, which maybe you could consider to be a little bit encouraging that he's not really hitting threes and he's still been really productive. I think the jump in defensive stats has been huge. One thing is for sure is that as long as Doug Christie is head coach of this basketball team, Keegan Murray is going to be on the floor as much as possible. Like he's going to play him a ton of minutes. Like Tom Thibodeau couldn't even play Josh Hart this much. I mean, he played him against the Jazz the other night, 45 minutes, no overtime in that game. Just didn't want to take him off the floor. Pretty insane. But Keegan Murray's a guy you were higher on than I was entering this year. I just wasn't super optimistic about this Kings team. That part was true. Wasn't super optimistic that they were going to get him the ball. That part wasn't true. And then the defensive stats, again, small sample size, but they've been there pretty consistently. How high can we view Keegan Murray after this few game sample size?
Yeah, Keegan Murray is one of those guys where I've been having to kind of endure waves of criticism and complaints about why is this guy still high in your dynasty rankings for a lot of years. And it's because, and we talked about this a little bit in the offseason, the guys who have really strong defensive value, who are really good defensive players, especially defensive wings, if you can do that, you're going to eventually get the opportunity to expand beyond that. And that's who Keegan Murray has been. He's been the best defensive player, along with Keon Ellis, on the Sacramento Kings for years now. He's been the guy that they've trusted to be able to defend the best wing on the other team, to defend Steph Curry at times. This is a guy that was valued, at least on some level, inside of the Kings organization, but his usage continued to dwindle. And his role in the offense was basically sitting out on the perimeter waiting for spot-up threes. That has shifted this season. Suddenly, Keegan Murray is working a mid-range game that we hadn't really seen since his time at Iowa. The three-pointer continues to not fall, but I think that does, like you said, give a reason for optimism. It's going to get back to a better level at a certain point. But the big thing is the defensive playmaking. I don't know how much of this can possibly hold, but we're talking about him at a 90th percentile steal rate and an 80th percentile block rate. It goes without saying, the block rate has been on the rise his last few seasons. That's very real to me. He blocks shots at a pretty high level. The steal rate, last year we were at 19th percentile. That is a dramatic change. If that holds, that completely changes things and moves him up significantly. If that even remotely holds, it changes things for him, especially if we're going to, and at this point, we're still only at 18% usage. So this is not a big offensive role. This is why I have a kind of an insanely high ceiling on what could happen here if the Kings do blow this up and Keegan Murray is one of the only last pieces standing. If we, as expected, kind of shed Zach LaVine at some point, shed DeMar DeRozan, get rid of Russell Westbrook, Dennis Schroeder, it's possible none of those guys are on this team next season. And in that reality, Keegan Murray will be the last thing standing, a guy who has a long-term contract with the Sacramento Kings. I think it's the one of the few core building blocks they have. They should give an extension to Keon Ellis as well. We'll see. They missed the opportunity to be able to do that this offseason, which I think was foolish. But this is a guy that I believed in for a while because I think he's a really good basketball player. I think he's a really good two-way basketball player who has had a role on offense that has hidden his true talent. We're starting to see that change. I'm buying into it. I'm looking forward to see where this heads. I never trust the Sacramento Kings to do the right thing, but at the very least, at this moment, they're kind of doing the right thing with Keegan Murray. So let's see if that continues. We're going to be watching this closely because I've been waiting for this for a few years now, and it's been long overdue.
Yeah, if only they were doing the right thing with Keon Ellis as well. Apparently their strategy is, hey, we're just not going to play this guy minutes so that he can't be productive and have a case to get a large contract. We're going to force him into a team-friendly deal by not playing him. We'll see how that strategy plays out for them. Next player I want to talk about is Keyonte George, who is having a really fun season in Utah. I think there was obviously reasons to not be super optimistic about the Jazz entering the season. We were both really high on Lauri Markkanen, but Keyonte George has definitely taken a leap as an offensive player, career highs in points and assists. Turnovers are up, but the field goal percentage has actually been much better than it has been in the past. It's usually been horrendous, and now it's just like kind of below average. Is kind of making it, I don't want to say a star leap, but like kind of a star leap as an offensive player. He's a very, very good player on offense. The defense is still not great. I wouldn't even call it good. I wouldn't even call it solid, but the offense is fun. Some nice things for fantasy basketball, but how do we view a player like this? Because you have him inside the top 100 at 98th. I'm curious to see if that's changed at all, and kind of evaluating him as, is this a player that we really believe can be a starting point guard on a playoff team, or is he enjoying the opportunity to shine on offense on a rebuilding team, and seeing how that changes as either he's on this team while they get more competitive, or if he's elsewhere on a more competitive team, just how all this fits together.
I feel like I have whiplash with Keyonte George because I didn't really love him as a pre-draft prospect. And then in Summer League, he came out looking a lot thinner than he did at Baylor, a lot more explosive. He came out in his rookie season, flashed an assist rate and a free throw percentage that we didn't really see at Baylor either. And suddenly the fantasy stat set looked like it was for real. And I was really excited about him coming into his second season because in the preseason, he looked a lot like this guy. And I thought that's what we were getting last season. And then he absolutely belly flopped the entire season. He was one of the worst players in the NBA last year, so bad that he got benched, and told in exit interviews that he was not a very good player at this point, that they believed in him, but that he had failed in that season, and that he needed to make dramatic change to be able to turn his career around. And he did that in this offseason by every measure. Everything that we've heard out of Utah is that he committed himself at a completely different level this offseason, and he has come out as a much, much better basketball player. With that said, there are still some significant concerns here. And this reminds me a little bit of the Kevin Porter Jr. Houston era, where the role was massive and there was clear talent. And there's no doubt about that with Keyonte George. The fantasy stats are there as well, but we kind of knew that it wasn't sustainable with Kevin Porter Jr. in Houston. Not necessarily, that was also because of character, but even in the style of play, we saw that play out with him, even when he came back with the Clippers last season. And he just wasn't a serious player defensively, so they got rid of him. And he then made another bounce back in Milwaukee. And maybe he's going to level up into being a kind of player who you can have as kind of a fringe starter, who has enough on-ball juice to be able to be worth having in a lineup if you don't have that otherwise from your star players. I think that might be who Keyonte George is. He might be kind of like an Anthony Simons type as well, who is an absolute one-way player, because defensively, it's still a disaster. On this Utah Jazz team, which is bad defensively, he's probably their worst defensive player along with Kevin Love. There's a little bit more effort. Last year, there was zero effort to a level that LaMelo Ball would say, hey, buddy, can you try a little bit on the defensive end? It's a little bit better than that this season, but he does not look capable defensively. Even if he wants to right now, it doesn't seem like it's there for him defensively. And that is going to be a limitation, because you're seeing it with Anthony Simons in Boston right now. If you're going to be on a serious team, on a real winning team, and you do not give the requisite threshold level of defensive effort, or you just don't have the ability defensively to be able to provide anything, it's hard to be able to find minutes, big minutes in the NBA. So I've moved Keyonte George up into my top 100. I like him from a fantasy perspective. I have serious concerns about him long-term. The free throw rate has been awesome this season. His ability to be able to blow by people is really impressive. He is athletically impressive. His passing has improved quite a bit, but he still doesn't get to the rim enough. The rim attempts really haven't improved this season at all. That's a big warning sign for me. And it's just the continued lack of giving anything on the defensive end that I can cling to be able to say, okay, this guy can be a starter on a real team, because this isn't a real team. This is a half team. The Utah Jazz are a good offensive team and a disaster defensively. And that is what Keyonte George is as well. That will work for now. That worked for Houston when Kevin Porter Jr. was the main guy in Houston. It's not going to work long-term in the next phase of the Utah Jazz. And maybe we see that change. That's the thing I'm going to be watching going forward. Can Keyonte George show me something sustainable to be able to say that he can actually be a starting point guard in the league on a winning team? I'm not there yet. He's gotten so much better, but right now to me, he still looks like kind of that microwave bench scorer, not a guy, especially it's because the three-point shooting has not evolved to a level where I see that being something that he can really hang his hat on either. We're still down below 33% on pretty high volume. If it's not improving there, we're not going to get there with him long-term on a real team. So that's what we're going to be watching for the rest of the season. Yes, you have to move him up because he's a much better player, but there are still some real concerns with Keyonte George.
Yeah, we will see if he's able to improve on defense. I think that's something I'd want to see, and it's going to be really difficult for him to do in Utah because, like you said, it's not exactly what you would call a really good or even a competent defensive team. But we're going to stick with the 2023 draft class and shift to a different guard who is better defensively, who is getting more of an opportunity this year, but still is kind of stuck as a reserve. That's Anthony Black, averaging a bunch of career highs in points, rebounds, threes, steals, field goal percentage is up. He's a player that I guess I'm still just hoping he gets a fresh start somewhere. Maybe that happens in Orlando where he's able to start, but I see Desmond Bane, I see Jalen Suggs, and I don't see an opportunity for Anthony Black. So maybe he gets a fresh start on a different team. I don't think Orlando should be actively looking to trade him. I think this is my selfish desire for him to be a starting guard somewhere. He's been really, really good, especially recently. Just the last game that we saw him play, 22, 9, and 3 with 2 blocks, 2 threes. He had a 31-point game the other night. Like, the offense is really clicking for him, and we know that he can be an impactful playmaking defender. Like, he can get steals. That was one of the best attributes for him as a fantasy prospect entering the NBA, where it was his insane steal rate in college. We will see. I'm curious to see your thoughts on him. You had him up to 153 in your latest update. How are you viewing Anthony Black?
Yeah, I have some really bad tweets out there about Anthony Black as a pre-draft prospect where I compared him to SGA at Kentucky. They were haunting me for a while, but he's making me feel a little less worried about those being resurfacing at some point because he was a really physical driver at Arkansas. He could get downhill and he was able to get to the rim and finish at the rim. And he's doing that this season. He's improved his rim attempt rate. He's up to finishing 67% at the rim. And, he's still not the level of shooter that he needs to be long-term, but the defensive playmaking looks really strong. And I'm beginning to see the outlines of a player who can be at least I think probably like a fringe starter kind of guy on a winning team, which is essentially what he is right now for the Orlando Magic. And no, I mean, I don't think the huge minutes opportunity is going to be there unless Jalen Suggs goes down again, which is always a possibility, as we know with Jalen Suggs. But I have a lot more encouragement about Anthony Black being a long-term guy who's hovering around 30 minutes a night, and that can fly in fantasy with his fantasy stat set, especially if it continues to develop with the steal rate the way that we've seen in the last couple of seasons. The blocks are always solid, and he's a guy who, if we're seeing now that he at least has one offensive skill of being able to drive to the rim, finish at the rim at a strong level, I think that's enough to hang his hat on to be able to be a guy who can hover around that 30-minute per game level, because he's also usually has been a solid defensive player. The metrics are a little bit behind this season, but from what I've watched in games, he at least passes the eye test on that end and has the size and physical ability to be able to hang in defensively. So I moved Anthony Black up to more of that top 125-ish range. I don't see the huge fantasy ceiling, but I see a guy that you can find to be dependable long-term because there's enough NBA stats skill set there and enough fantasy stat set there for him to be someone who can be dependable for us and consistent for us across his prime, which we're still a ways out on. This kid's 21 years old. There's a lot more of Anthony Black to come in the future.
Yeah, that is the fun aspect about talking about a lot of these guys, is that they are all still so young. They're showing us some really, really fun flashes, and it'll be really exciting to see what they can do as they get older, enter in closer to their prime. But that's going to do it for this episode. Before I let you go, Matt, where can what should we be on the lookout for? We'll follow you on Twitter at NBA Dynasty ADP. Check out your Patreon as well. What content do you have coming up that we can be on the lookout for?
Oh, Noah, I have been in my complete sicko mode over the past few weeks. I have a 2026 NBA draft board that has over 500 prospects on it right now. And We went too deep last year. We're way down the rabbit hole this time. I've got fantasy evaluations on about 50 of them at this point. I'm going to need to just stop and publish this thing at some point, but I've been watching a lot of college basketball because like every prospect is in college basketball this year because of NIL money. All the international players, even guys who aren't eligible for this NBA draft because they already had their eligibility year pass. There are guys who could sign with an NBA team right now who are just playing in college basketball and playing big minutes in college basketball. The system is completely broken, but it's great for being able to actually watch these guys play. So I've been watching a ton of it. As a preview to everybody who got all the way to the end of this episode, I love this draft class. And it's not just the top three guys. We talked a little bit about that before. We like Darren Peterson. Cam Boozer's been amazing. He, from a fantasy perspective, even better fantasy than real life prospect. Wait till you see what the fantasy stats that projects to be for Cam Boozer. And then, AG Debonsa, I've got some questions, but as far as athletic profile, frame, I mean, like the potential is off the charts. But then there are multiple guys, 3 or 4 guys after that, and one guy who I would maybe even take above Debonsa, who are going to be fantasy stars as well. So this is boding to be a class that it's early. Some of these numbers regress, but for where they're on track right now, it would compare favorably to the 2021 class with Cade Cunningham and Scottie Barnes and Josh Giddey and Evan Mobley that we liked so much back then for fantasy, with Franz, who I had projected really high, with Şengün. There's a ton of guys in this class that I love that I think are going to be really good fantasy producers. So that is on the horizon. I'm going to unleash that at some point because the world deserves to see my madness. And then I'm going to have a Dynasty rankings update as well. That always has over 500 people in it. That's nothing new. So you're going to get all of that coming up on my Patreon soon. We continue the effort to be able to be constantly in motion on all this because basketball is always changing. Players are always changing. So we're going to be doing the work to make sure that you understand where all of it is heading, whether it's guys who aren't in the NBA yet or the guys who are already producing in it or the guys who will be producing in the future. We're going to keep on top of it for all of you. Noah, it was awesome to be back doing this with you. I'm glad that we were back on the show, and I look forward to being back with you soon.
Absolutely. It's always fun doing these shows with you, Matt. I'm excited. You bring up the point about these prospects mostly being in college basketball. That'll actually be great for us to compare analytically as well, because if they're all playing in the same league as opposed to trying to compare different leagues, the only difference here will be maybe like conferences and type of competition. But definitely follow Matt. Check out his Patreons. We're going to find all the crazy at 500 deep in December is, yeah, Matt, that is crazy. But really excited to see what that looks like. That's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, part of the Believe Network, and presented to you by our partners at FanDuel. I'm Noah Rubin. He is Matt Lawson, and we will see you guys next time.